Hi, this is Paul. A bunch of reasons for not putting out a video yesterday. Had some dental work done, so my mouth was numb, etc. I'm still trying to get a handle on sound levels. I don't need to wear this right now. Trying to get a handle on sound levels and how to improve my sound. I've got a better camera, trying to improve the rig a little bit. But in the meantime, doing a ton of thinking about this video that Glen Scrivener put out. Glen is doing a series on called Reset. And actually, I did an interview with him. Esther did an interview with him. He's got a good interview with Douglas Murray. But so far, the crown and the jewel is the conversation with Tom Holland, I think. And that conversation, for me, just sort of brought everything into light in terms of why Tom Holland so grabbed my imagination with his work, and why Jordan Peterson, and this odyssey that I've been on for the last 3 years. And so Tom Holland first came on my radar in June 2018 or July 2018 when Unbelievable posted a video with him and N.T. Wright. And apparently in 2016, Tom Holland had done an article in the New Statesman where the trajectory of his belief, he basically sort of came out with the trajectory of his belief and began doubting his faith in the Enlightenment. Now that sounds crazy because to many of us, we think, well, Enlightenment truth simply is that space reality. Now, actually, I've done 3 videos in anticipation of this, none of which saw the light of day, some of which for technical reasons, some of which for time reasons. So we'll see if this one actually makes any progress. And I'd really love to do a full-on commentary video, again, on Justin Brierley, Jordan Peterson, and Susan Blackmore's conversation on Unbelievable that came out in June 2018. Because listening to it now, I hear it with whole new ears. And I want to do a complete commentary video on Tom Holland's conversation with Glen Scrivener, because I think that breaks new ground. And in some ways, I haven't been as excited about a video that I am about that conversation as I've been for a long time. And it gets into these very basic questions that I've been struggling with the whole time. I ran across Jordan Peterson because I was really wrestling with, as Poe said, come for the culture war, stay for the religion. I was really wrestling with the issues of how we can, how to say it even. As a preacher, on one hand, I was already living into Tom Holland's reality because I was living in the mythos. I was living in the story. But how does the story match up with everything that we've done and learned for the last 500 years? That's really the question. It's a deeply Protestant question. And it came to a very basic example. C.S. Lewis wrestles with it a bit in his book, Miracles. When Christ ascends, what does that mean? Because, we send Teslas up into space, and we don't think we're delivering them to the throne room of God. There, of course, in Lewis's time was the Russians put up Sputnik, and well, we didn't see God, and then the first man into space. Oh, we didn't see God, even though it was a Russian Orthodox guy, so he wouldn't have said what the Soviets put in his mouth. They were doing their own propaganda. So for some reason, Peterson came onto the scene, and there are so many reasons I was interested in. One of them was, why are you able to do what you're doing? I didn't understand, and I wanted to learn. And what are you about? And why am I finding Peterson's work so engaging for reasons I can't fully articulate? And many other pastors did too. Many other people found it threatening. Why is he so annoying to certain classes of new atheists? Why is he so cagey about his belief in God? And I just worked out some sound questions that I have with my rig here. And so maybe I'll be able to do a full-on commentary video again with the new setup. That's sort of been what I've been working for. But it boils down to this question of what do we mean by religion? And if you re-listen to the unbelievable video with Peterson and Susan Blackmore, that question haunts this, as well as the question that I've been wrestling with. Well, what do we mean when we use this word God? And how does that play into our lives? In this video, you'll hear Susan Blackmore say basically a couple of things. And again, I think she's being completely honest here and transparent. She's definitely speaking in good faith here. And Justin Brierley, I think, is a master for setting up context for these kinds of conversations. And that's part of the reason I've been a big fan of his program for years. It was the only program like it. And so in a funny way, when Jordan Peterson came on the scene, it was sort of like vindication of Justin Brierley's project. But Susan Blackmore says, well, religious countries do worse than non-religious countries. And it's like, and Peterson sort of challenges her on there, and rightfully so. What America is more or less religious than Uganda. Well, America does better. Well, I'm not going to compare America and Uganda. What are you going to compare? America to Sweden. Oh, okay. But, as many people have pointed out, Sweden doesn't have anywhere near the diversity or the size of a country like America. Does America do better than China? Would you consider China religious? So, it's, but then she says, but religious people often do better. Well, that's interesting. And the thing to watch is that, again, how words are sloshy. When we use the word religion in a context like this, we all sort of know what we mean. But if we're really pressing for a definition, it all sort of comes apart. And he points to the pragmatists here, because we know these words well enough to sort of communicate back and forth with each other, but we don't know them well enough to really dig down and come to some clear mutual understanding of what we're talking about. So, of course, we're going to have a lot of misunderstandings and missed communication when we try to talk about what we mean by this word. And so in many ways, I'm just trying to dig down deeper and deeper and deeper and say, what do we mean by this word? It's fudgy. It's sloshy. We fudge with it. That's what fudging is. We're playing all sorts of, Peterson in 2018 would say, dominance hierarchy games. We're all playing all kinds of status games with it. But it's also sloshy in that we don't, you're not going to really contain it and set it on the table. You try to pour it on the table and it runs all over the place, and it doesn't seem to work very well. And so, of course, Susan Blackmore in this video sort of promotes, the idea that once we get rid of public religion, well, you can do it privately, but just don't vote because of it, as if you're watching the Supreme Court nominations that one side has a religion and the other side doesn't. And that's why, Ben Sass's comment about physics, I posted on Twitter. It isn't physics that's leaving. It's in many ways the framework, and this is terrifying for me. The framework, the Enlightenment framework of the Founding Fathers was separation of, well, it's not actually separation of religion, it's separation of church and state. What if the idea and the definition, or at least the communal sloshy definition of religion that has seemed to work fairly well in the West and in the United States for the last so often, this mic continues to creep down. Cheap stand that I inherited from a church that didn't pay its bills. What if this communal understanding of what is and isn't religion falls apart? When you get into Steve Smith's arguments, and yeah, there's a lot going on in these arguments. When you get into Steve Smith's arguments, and he's a lawyer, what if this thing falls apart? Well, we don't know what that looks like, but to listen to Tom Holland reflect on India and Turkey, well, secularism is losing its stuffing in India and Turkey. What does that mean that the Hagia Sophia will once again be a mosque and no longer a museum? Because the religion Ataturk had in his mind was secularism, and the religion that India had in its mind was secularism, and the religion that a whole bunch of Americans have in their mind is secularism. But what if the really terrifying thing that we're seeing when we're looking at the rise of the nuns is not that they are secular? And we think, no, that's absurd, because almost the departure from church and the rise of the nuns, that's almost the textbook definition of secular. But as we're seeing with the rise of woke religion, that's a religion. And the atheists are seeing it, guys like James Lindsay, and calling it out and pointing it out. Now, of course, Susan Blackmore will continue to use the standard the standard religious line that, well, people use religion for psychological compensation, but you can do other non-religious things like meditation. And, Glen Scrivener nails a number of times. So Buddhism isn't religious. Actually, I think it was JB here. You're borrowing that from a religion, aren't you? Well, yeah, but it's not the religion we're really scared about. And at a point in here, when JB asked Susan Blackmore about 12 Rules for Life, she's on one hand she says, well, the book is full of all kinds of wisdom and nice stories, but then you bring the Bible into it. I'm melting. So you can do other non-religious things to get the same psychological effects. Well, what are these non-religious things? And so if you go back to the video I made about that belief in God is not the difference between scientists or between Christians and atheists. Or it's not the difference we think it is. And I think in many ways that's a big piece of what Jordan Peterson brought to the table, that his defiance about not saying whether or not he believes in God, but he acts as if God is real. I mean, that changed the landscape. So I want to remind us of John Vervaeke's 4 Ps: the propositional, the perspectival, the participatory, and the procedural. Because when we talk about religion, we're going to have to keep all those 4 Ps in mind. And usually we just look at the propositional. And Jordan Peterson, towards the end of the video, when he tries to do a little bit of discerning of religion, doesn't really push it as far as say John Vervaeke does in his work, because I think Vervaeke is right that you need all 4 Ps. And so then what do we mean by this word? Well, the definition is understandably dominated by people's experiences with Christians all around them. And these are people who grew up, and Susan Blackmore, I grew up in church. Jordan Peterson grew up in church. Church attendance in the United States and probably Canada reached its peak during the Cold War. It was already in significant decline during the Cold War in the UK. But most of these people say, I know what religion is. Religion is when I used to go to church and I used to pray to God and I used to, and now we're going to have to dig out and dig into that a little bit more and ask deeper questions. Okay, what exactly is religion and where does it start and stop? Because there's really 2 competing definitions of here. One is the definition by secularists that religion are these certain types of propositional things we hold, perspectival and participatory, agent and arena things that we trust in. My definition of Christianity, that you trust in Jesus more than you trust in yourself. That's perspectival and participatory. And then procedural, where we're going to church and praying the prayer, and lots of Christians praying, and all of this somehow impacts a God, and that God then will control and change history. Okay? That's in a sense the secular definition of religion. But increasingly, the definition of religion that is emerging, and Brett Weinstein isn't quite there, and I do want to see David Sloan Wilson talk to Brett Weinstein, because I think David Sloan Wilson is barking harder up the right tree and saying, no, religion is the culture net. It's the symbolic, dramatic, liturgical, imaginary that we actually use between ourselves to compete and cooperate and to actually live together. And Now, you could call it symbolic, dramatic, liturgical, imaginary. You can call it culture net. But that's really what religion is. It's just so massive. And the fact that we manage, usually intuitively, to somehow participate in it in ways that our left brain isn't fully cognizant of because it hasn't been able to systemize it, but our right brain is sort of, thinking in those terms, sort of managing it intuitively. And so then, as Poe, she has this child, and there's a degree of crisis in terms of what's, is my baby going to be okay? She finds herself praying, and then it's, why am I praying? What's going on? And then she asks me, do you think I believe in God? Probably. And I'm with Peterson in that, and Peterson sort of turned the light on there. So the definition of religion is dominated by Christianity and secularism, because that's as Peterson says, and that's the water we're immersed in. At the beginning, JB asks, are you religious? I'm deeply religious. Are you Christian? Well, I can't help but be, because of where I was raised. And when Peterson says that, and when I hear him say that now, all of the Tom Holland stuff just lights up. And most people are remembering Christianity has been co-evolving with secularity. And in that piece I wrote with John Vervaeke and Christopher Mastro Pietro, I called Christianity sort of the secret sister, or secularity sort of the secret sister of the church. That the Indians, they look around and, yeah, we don't believe in the religious aspect here. We don't believe in the propositional or the perspectival, procedural, or participatory, because really church going is sort of participatory and procedural. I mean, these things do all come together in knowledge. They're sort of like aspects of a prism. But the Indians say, no, the church stuff we don't want. We forgot all of our religion stuff. All that programming is deeply bedded into us. But the secular idea, well, that has promise. The dental assistant said I should limit my talking. That isn't going to happen. I might pay for it in terms of my dental work. Most Christians don't know much. Most Christians don't know much theology or church history, and many atheists know considerably less. Well, not considerably. Some atheists know more than a lot of Christians, and some Christians know a lot more. I mean, it's just the way human populations work. But it sort of goes like this. We have religious people, and we have religious nations, and we have religious cultures. Those are the terms that Susan Blackmore was using. And the propositional believe that, that's the propositional knowledge. The participatory, or the perspectival, trust in, believe, and then, of course, the participatory and the procedural sort of mold together, do certain things, go to church, pray, and if we all go to church, then the nation will be saved. And you can find preachers on the internet talking this way all the time, and they're talking with, now we got to bring in another, they're talking with sort of this supernatural participatory procedural drama. And we're going to have to talk about that too, because that's part of the package that's definitely getting highlighted as religious. And then it's easy to distinguish because non-religious people don't do those things or talk that way or imagine that if we get 1 million people in America to pray that God will save the nation, then such and such a person will or won't get elected, or abortion rates, and again, if you go back to the last few videos, it's all the directness that really atheists get nervous about. Okay, and because, and again, Susan Blackmore, she's very honest in that conversation, because she said, well, religious nations don't do as well as secular nations. Okay, how are you going to categorize that and do that math? Peterson says he will. She says she won't. Religious people do better. Okay, well, how are you going to categorize that? You're using, again, I was, reading, can't remember his name right now. Religiosity kind of becomes this defining marker in the culture war. Putnam. And Sam Harris. I mean, Sam Harris learns his learns about religious people directly from religious people, because both the atheist and the religious are participating in these categories. And the atheists are sort of saying, well, if you get that religiosity out of your life will go better. And the Christians are saying, no, if you get that religiosity in your life will go better. And for a while, well, during the Cold War, the religiosity people were sort of winning, and were winning big time, because the communists didn't have religion, and, you know, they weren't doing very well. Because, well, how did we know? Because I grew up during the Cold War, and we'd see on the news these empty shelves in the communist, in communist stores. We Americans, our supermarkets were full. Theirs were empty. And of course, when, people are always there, there's a problem in your country if you have to put a wall around it, or that you've got good things in your country if you have to put a wall around it. It all depends on which way the wall goes. And so East Germany puts up a wall to keep people in, and, America puts up a wall to keep people out. Well, there's sort of something going on when everyone in the world wants to get into your country. Well, that's not lack of evidence. That is evidence, but exactly evidence of what? And that's where the complexity of the world gets so difficult. So let's look at Sam Harris's God, which is very much God number 2. There is a conscious being, a super thing that is personal. And again, as I said before, this has sort of become in YouTube what the big atheist debate. We see that all the time. And the whole thing is about, is there a super thing or not a super thing? And to the degree that Christians sort of get backed into the corner of arguing for a super thing, they concede way too much to the atheists. And so Sam Harris say, well, this God, what we mean by God is that there is a conscious being that is a super thing, and it's personal. And this conscious being knows everyone, has lots of power, watches you individually. Oh, be careful, little eyes, what you see. Notices if you're praying at night. It's sort of like Santa Claus, naughty or nice, cares about your behavior. It's kind of Superman, kind of Santa Claus, but a conscious being. And this conscious being will reward you. You can have a personal relationship with this conscious being, will reward you or punish you according to how well you please the conscious being. And back to Eric Weinstein's, well, the problem with God is you got to worry about what he thinks. And you can improve your life, religious people say, you can improve your life and the world by doing certain things to make this conscious being happy, to please this conscious being, to get in alignment with conscious being. Now, again, Sam Harris obviously isn't promoting this. Sam Harris is debunking this, and that's his big project. I'm going to debunk this. Oh, okay. There is no such conscious being. There is no super thing. Oh, okay. So there is no super thing. Well, then you have to begin to ask, well, I've been counting on the super thing I've been counting on doing the right thing by the super thing so that my life will be in order. I've been praying for my nation and for the world to the super thing. And Sam Harris says, there's no such super thing. And Christians come on, and it's exactly at this point that Christians would say, no, you're right, Sam, there is no super thing. But that's not the Christian definition of God. And that's where Jordan Peterson, when he reads his definition of God, and Sam Harris can't recognize it. Because Jordan Peterson isn't, again, Jordan's got this crazy idea. I can see why she says I shouldn't talk. Plus my meds are getting to the end of their time frame. There is no super thing. And Jordan Peterson is saying, I'm not talking about a super thing. And Sam Harris and Susan Blackburn, no, you're giving aid and comfort to the people who believe in a super thing. And a lot of those people believe in a super thing. We're just going to have to be really careful about how we talk about this, because some of you will listen to this and say, well Paul, you're giving up our side because we're all about the super thing. And I say, no. You don't know your theology or your Christianity well enough, because to a degree, Sam Harris is making a point, so let him make his point. And how this works out among many Christian people in their imaginary, that's Charles Taylor's word. And what do I mean by that? That's sort of the, okay, that's the culture net. That's the religion. That's what Jordan Peterson calls it, a religion at Lafayette. That's the imaginary, how this sort of functions in their intuitive right brain that gets acted out. It's not really systematized well by the other part of the brain. It's just how they work. And so when Bruce Almighty came out, it was a popular movie. I mean, Jim Carrey's funny, Morgan Freeman's charming. And so what is God? Well, there he is. He's a nice black man. And basically what happens is this. And again, for me, the second commandment, you shall not make a graven image. You shall not promote in society an idea that God can be represented by Morgan Freeman. And you might say, well, he's an actor and he's playing God. Yeah, but this is impacting us, okay? And Christians and non-Christians love the movie. And so basically, what the church non-church fight has been something like this, that, well, Christians have basically been doing PR for God to make him more likable, to make him more popular, because if we can make God more likable and popular, because people like Sam Harris have been saying, oh, he's a tyrant, because the super thing out there is a bad thing or a good thing, okay? And Sam says, life is better because the super thing isn't there, and I had concerns about his character anyway. And Christians, no, it's a good character. Oh, okay. So that's what we're fighting about, Morgan Freeman's character. And so then we reframe Bible stories to make God more likable in order to recruit people into God's fan club. That's kind of been the religious game. But in many ways, the moment Christians sort of concede that God is a super thing, or a nice black man in a white suit, or an old white guy in the clouds, Michelangelo, or once this sort of gets lodged in the imaginary, Christians have other problems to deal with. Because what this does subtly in the culture net is, again, there's a kindly, wise, oldish man who lives, or is at least accessible to Buffalo, New York. That's where Bruce Almighty was set in. He knows everything. He's kindly and wise. He's respectful of our choices, although has thoughts about them. And he's managing things subtly behind the scenes. And Bruce Almighty is sort of this little morality tale that we human beings make really crappy gods. Now, you can understand that one way, that Bruce made a really crappy god, or we can understand that looking at Morgan Freeman and say, we also make really crappy gods, in terms of if we're going to make Morgan Freeman a god. And again, now, Bruce Almighty was done by a Christian, and many Christians loved it. I enjoyed the movie, and I think a lot of spiritual but not religious people saw that, because even though a lot of people, many spiritual but not religious people, aren't going to church, partly because, again, they're skeptical whether that participatory procedural actually will make a improvement in their lives. And so then Christians go into this other mode where, no, it's made a big improvement in my life, versus, no, I do just fine staying away from church and imagining God from what I see in Hollywood or Oprah or my next door neighbor or a variety of other sort of quasi-religious traditions from all around the world are imagining God. And so now we're into the American religious marketplace. But of course, Brett Sockold says, wait a minute, you put God in the system. What? And when he said that, when I was talking to Brett, it was like, bang, a light went off. It's like, oh, I didn't have the words. And Brett had the words. You put God in the system. Brett's a theologian, a very well, better educated theologian than I am. He's an academic. He does theology for a diocese, but he also teaches people. And, well, what do you mean? And, well, part of the second commandment is don't put God in the system. God can put himself in the system, but don't put him in the system. And it's, again, I'm a pastor. I do PR for God all the time. But Christians don't believe, Christian theology, a lot of Christians do believe God is in the system, but Christianity, I should have changed that, doesn't believe that God is in the system. God in some ways is this system, but that language isn't quite right. Go see my thing on the Great Puzzle, because that's sort of gets into that question. You know, the Apostle Paul quoting Stoics, "In him we live and move and have our being." That kind of sounds like God is the system. The whole earth is full of his glory. Frodo can't find Tolkien in Rivendell. He might find Bilbo there, but he's not finding Tolkien. Well, there's some of Tolkien in Frodo, and there's some of Tolkien in Bilbo, and there's even some of Tolkien in Sauron and Saruman and Gandalf and Aragorn. And, well, now you sound like a pantheist. No, I'm not a pantheist. And Luke said, "No, you're a panentheist." I say, leave that word alone. I'm not sure exactly I'm not sure if I want to have a personal relationship with that word, Luke. So that's why I don't use it. I'd rather say I'm a theist. But God isn't in the system, but he can write himself in. And again, look at Dorothy Sayers, and Tim Keller riffs on Dorothy Sayers on this point. And now Sam Harris then jumps in and says, "Hey, wait a minute. Christians act as if God is a super thing." Yeah, we kind of do. Because Christians pray to God. You know, they have propositional knowledge, they have procedural knowledge, they have perspectival, participatory knowledge. Christians pray to God, they try to please God, they try to live moral lives so that God will reward them as good and reward them for being good. And you find stories like that all the time in the Bible. And they believe it's efficacious. Christians and Jews in the Bible too do these sorts of things, and in the Bible stories it pays off. Hannah is praying and praying and praying and praying in the tabernacle that she could have a son. Am I not worth 7 sons? No, you're not. But Eli's sons, Eli is blind. He's blind to his son's sin. I mean, the Bible is working at all these different layers, and the text is so subtle. But Sam Harris says, "Hey, wait a minute. You Christians all act like God is personal." Jordan Peterson at one point says, "Well, that's probably not a bad way to represent it." Yeah, and that's part of my point too. But it's not just Christians. Nathan Jacobs, in his his talk at the Orthodox Church, it's not just Christians. When people drop the personal God, and they basically stop representing God personally, they still sort of relate to him personally, because that's the spirit of finesse. That's the mode that we relate to things that are too complex for our understanding, when we don't have the spirit of geometry. We don't have handles on it to bend it to our way. So when people drop the personal God and the religion, the stuff we're calling religion, they keep doing the same thing. And Susan Blackmore, "I'm grateful to the universe." Well, you know, how rational is it for me to be grateful to the cell phone stand? I might be grateful that there's a cell phone stand, but to be grateful to the cell phone stand, well, she's just giving way totally to mythos. She's giving way totally to a personal relationship with the universe. I might be grateful that there is a cell phone stand, that's some engineer, but to the degree that I relate to any personal thing, grateful to, that's pretty much participatory. That's participatory. It just is. It's religious. Now, you've taken out God and you've put in universe. I listen to people do that all the time. The universe brought me. Why are you using, well, that's only language that I'm using. Really? Well, why is it only language for you but not for Christians? They appeal to karma. Karma. Oh, okay, karma. Well, that's mechanistic. Oh, okay. But you're sure treating it personally. You're relating it to it. You're relating to it as a person, because there's no other way you can. And that's the completely natural and appropriate way that you relate to it. Just like you relate to the American government personally, or you might relate to your car personally, or you relate to all sorts of other things in the universe personally, because you are a person and you can't help but do it that way. And then they worry about the unreliable narrator. Go watch my videos that I did back when I was, talking to Nathan Jacobs. He got busy, so I haven't pursued him since. Maybe I will again. They look for impersonal patterns or power or energy or astrology or spiritual, etc., in order to game the system to their advantage. That's basic religion. Back in 2006 to 2008, Tim Keller was sort of using religion in a negative sense in a lot of his sermons. He was saying, well, Christianity is not religion. Well, how do you understand religion? Well, religion is trying to game the universe. And in a way, it sort of banks on the idea that I'm more of a person than the system around me. I have consciousness, I have rationality. So once I figure out the mechanistic means by way things work, then I'd better not put that mirror on myself because that'll cause a meaning crisis. Then I am going to game the universe and get out of the universe what I want. And Tim Keller, 2006 to 2008, was saying that's religion. Now, when you have a personal God, suddenly the whole idea of, well, let's respect persons, well, that's built into this entire system that we've inherited. So, in many ways, this religion that, well, I believe the universe is impersonal, okay, but I believe that there's like moral cause and effect. Oh, okay, and watch My Name is Earl sitcom from not too many years ago. And once I learned the rules of the cause and effect, do good things, get good things. Do bad things, get bad things. Okay, but I'm not religious. Okay, I'm spiritual. Oh, really? You're just playing games with words. It's sloshy. Or Sam Harris, I'm gonna these are the systems by which that's not religious either, I suppose. You're still personal, and you're engaging the universe in a personal way. And I would argue you're probably acting as if the universe is personal. And so now Glen is doing his reset series, and basically more and more people are coming to the decision that the culture net is fundamentally adapted from deep coding of Christianity, and there's no escaping it. And that's basically where Tom Holland is, and that's basically where Douglas Murray is. Yes, Esther, Douglas Murray. More Douglas Murray visibility in my videos. I know that makes you happy. And what we've sort of done is immanentized the end. Strawn just sent me an email. And this, people who are deeply saying, I want my best life now. Well, that's exactly what, so a lot of what I see in this, I watch the church do on one side, and I watch the non-religious people do on the other side. And it's like, you're doing the same thing. Joel Osteen and Your Best Life Now, and Sam Harris, there's no, the Beatle, Imagine There's No Heaven. Okay, you're just immanentizing it. That's Steve Smith's point about paganism. What if paganism isn't just polytheism that Christianity beat out, but what if a degree of paganism is immanentism? And saying, well, we need our best life now. And so we're going to look for the mechanics. That's Tim Keller's definition of religion. We're going to look for the mechanics because this is sort of keeping the meaning crisis at bay. I am going to get what I want by exposing, you can use the principalities and the powers, by exposing the spiritual laws, by exposing the sociological laws, by understanding systemic racism or patriarchy, or all of these mechanistic things. Once I will exclude myself from that mechanism, well, where do you come from? Well, and again, woke religion sort of opens the door a little bit. Well, I've been formed by all this stuff. Yeah, you have. But there's a secret, sacred self. There's something sacred somewhere. And as Steve Smith knows, whether you put that down here below or you put that up above, there's going to be consequences for where you put it. And so, well, we're going to achieve this through science and technology. Okay, I mean, you're having trouble. You're having trouble with a meaning crisis because the more brain books you read and the more cognitive science you read, the deeper you penetrate, and the the more you listen to Sam Harris, you are an illusion. What do you mean I'm an illusion? I know I'm here. No, the you that thinks you are. You're just part of, again, read Miracles. You're just part of the whole show. You're just the genetics of your parents and your culture and your upbringing. You're just math. There's no choice. Choice is an illusion. It's all determined. All right, so that means I shouldn't care. Oh, you'll find yourself caring, but that's an illusion too. And then we get into this weird, well, am I or am I not an illusion? Is choice real or not real? Does anything matter? And at one point, Susan Blackmore basically pulls out the nihilistic denial trope, where once I realize my nihilism, then I'm free to do whatever. Oh, okay. But do you have problems with Dostoevsky? Once, God is gone, you basically do whatever. It's kind of the same argument. And except you're pointing out and say, I can experience wonder and agency and all of those things, and I can meditate. Well, you're just afraid of going to church? I mean, you're playing in religious spheres all over the place to have all the religious feels, and you're afraid of going to church? Yeah, because that I might forget who I really am. Oh, so now you're back to Christians not wanting to go into other temples because they might forget who they really are. What's going on? But we've sort of immanentized all of this, and whether you're doing it in prosperity gospel or prosperity secularism. Now, Sam Harris has a point that, well, religion is sort of archaic technology, and yeah, that's a point. That's a good point. But it misses the deeper, and the point is true, because the Greeks, when they were sacrificing, they weren't doing it as religion. Again, that's Tom Holland's insight. They weren't doing it as religion as we think of religion. They're just working the universe in the same way that we build a hydroelectric dam, or in the same way that Gavin Newsom says no more gasoline cars sold in California after 2035. Apparently, it's an executive order by the governor, so at some point, if one governor says he doesn't want it, they just sign it away. And so why did you do that, Gavin? I'm like, Freddie, I'm talking to my audience that isn't there. Why did you do that, Gavin? Well, you did it for the politics, okay? That's why you did it. Whether it's a good idea or not a good idea, I don't know. It's 2035 is a little ways away, but religion as ancient technology? Yeah, sort of. I agree with that, but sort of misses how religious our own technology is. Well, no, that's religion and technology. Those are two separate things. Well, in the ancient world, they weren't two separate things. What makes you think they're two separate things now? A lot of people, their religion is their technology. That's the participatory. That's the perspectival world they're living in. It's the culture net. It's the symbolic, dramatic, liturgical imaginary by which individuals and their cultures collectively conceptualize their ways, means, and ends. Because Sam Harris has a sort of sloshy idea of well-being. Okay. But, of course, Peterson comes in and says, yeah, but you're not really taking meaning seriously. And David Sloan Wilson comes in and says, and Brett Weinstein, you don't really have a human being without this. And so the point is made, but if the point is applied to us, okay, if when they were doing the sacrifices and going to temple, that was their technology. We call it religion. Okay, but when we're doing our technology, wouldn't the ancients maybe look at us and call that our religion? And this is where, and Glenn, with his editing of the video, he starts off, he doesn't bury the lead, and starts off with Tom Holland saying, I've lost my faith. And with all this deconstruction, we expect people to, I've given up my Christian faith and Okay. Tom Holland says, I've given up my Enlightenment faith. What? That's not that's not a faith. That's not a thing. That's not a religion. No, again, remember, if we look back at the ancients and say, what we call religion, that religious things that you're doing, you thought of as technology. Right. And they look back at us and say, that technology stuff that you're doing, yeah, we call that religion. No, not religion. Yeah, religion. Because it's our perspectival belief. And so, well, what's going to save us from global climate change? Technology. What's going to save us from racism? Well, see, we don't think about reshaping society as technology, but we think about the knowledge we have about the mechanisms within society that breed racism and bias and inequity. We think about those things as sciences, and we approach them as sciences. So then isn't all the politics technology? We do call it political science. We're doing the same things. So Tom Harris comes along and says, I've lost my faith. You've lost your faith in God? No, I've lost my faith in the Enlightenment. Now you're a heretic. And this is the tree that Douglas Murray's been barking up. And this is the faith that Tom Holland has lost. And it's the faith itself is in decline. Well, that's the thing. That's why, and again, I think Dr. Jim was exactly right. That's why Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, all of them arose, because we feel the faith slipping away, and we see it slipping away in India, and we see it slipping away in Turkey, and we see it slipping away in Europe. And, well, son of a gun, what's replacing it? It's all the ancient technology. And then Sam Harris wants to pull his hair out. I don't have much left. India's leaving secular. Turkey's leaving secular. The more successful sister of the church, the secular sister, is losing her stuff all around the world. And this gets back to David Slow's. You can't have a society without a culture net. You just have to have it. You can't have human beings without it. We don't see it as religion. Well, that's the whole what's water thing. And now we've got some people, Jordan Peterson, Douglas Murray, Tom Holland, are increasingly aware of this. And they're talking about it out loud. And people don't like it. People don't like it because, well, there's a culture net religion that's moving. And well, we always fight about religion. It's the main thing to fight about because they're trying to figure it out. And they're anxious about what we're about to lose, but unsure how to proceed. And all three of them seem very much in that space. Now, I'm always starting and not finishing too many books. And for someone who does this, Will Durant's The Story of Civilization is just catnip. And so I'm in the middle of Rousseau and Revolution right now because I was reading a biography of Napoleon, and I was realizing how much I didn't know about Napoleon's context in the run-up to the French Revolution. And so Will Durant is just such a good writer and so much fun to read and so much fun. It's all an audiobook, so much fun to listen to. You can find it on pieces of it on YouTube. And I run into a name I've never heard of before, Turgot, and I don't speak French. Sorry, Quebecois. And Robert Jacques Turgot, the Baron of someplace I can't pronounce. Born May 10, 1727, died March 18, 1781. This quote from The Story of Civilization, taken from a book in the 50s called The Idea of Progress. Before man understood the causal connection of physical phenomena, nothing was so natural as to suppose they were produced by intelligent beings, invisible and resembling themselves. This is a point that I've been making in my videos lately. All that stuff's been built into me and I didn't even know it. And when I find it, it's like, I've discovered something new. Nah, he's writing this in the 18th century. When philosophers recognized the absurdity of these fables about the gods, but had not yet gained an insight into natural history. Natural. What is that word? How did that word change by the 18th century? They thought to explain the cause of phenomena by abstract expressions such as essences and faculties. Oh. It was only at a later period that, by observing the reciprocal mechanical action of bodies, hypotheses were formed which could be developed into mathematics and verified by experience. Science! I dug a little deeper because, hey, The Idea of Progress, put out in 1957, 99 cents on Amazon on Kindle. Woohoo! Turgot, this is the quote that basically Durant lifts, but it's a worthwhile quote in its larger expression. Turgot also propounds two laws of development. This book is about, well, where did we get the idea of progress? And Tom Holland's been saying, we got it from Christianity. And all these progressives that are saying we need to leave Christianity behind, yeah, but you're Christian smuggling here because you got the idea from them, and it's sort of built into their system. And so, well, I'll keep reading. Turgot also propounded two laws of development. He observed that when a people is progressing, every step it takes causes an acceleration in the rate of progress. The problem with progress is you get telos. You can't have progress without telos. And he anticipates Comte's famous law of the three stages of intellectual evolution, though without giving it the extensive and fundamental significance which Comte claimed for it. Well, why? Well, 100 years later, we all just believed a little bit more in this process than we did 100 years before, or at least the few people who were thinking and talking about it. Before man understood the causal connections of physical phenomena, nothing was so natural as to suppose they were produced by intelligent beings, invisible and resembling ourselves. Their inside looks like our inside. That's the way I say it. For what else would they have resembled? Living things. That's Comte's theological stage. When philosophers recognized the absurdity of fables about God, but had not yet gained an insight into natural history, they thought to explain the causes of phenomena by abstract expressions such as essences and faculties. Well, now there are essences. There are these things sort of outside of God. Right away, God as system is receding, and so Christians who are PR promoters for God are going to continue to elevate God number two, because God number one is sort of going away. And now we're reducing God into essences or attributes theologically. And we kind of make them impersonal. Well, why do we do that? Well, actually, last night at the meetup, Mike was saying, talking about the personhood in AI. And, well, what's a person? Well, why do we regard things as people? Because we're sort of tracking certain processes in them that we recognize as persons. And then we notice a certain degree of moreness, used a Vervaeke thing, that we haven't accounted for. And we say, there's a person. So a person is sort of predictable enough to be recognizable, but unpredictable enough to be recognizable. And there now we'll have free will. And so, again, now we're burrowing down into what we mean by persons. So that's Comte's theological stage. When philosophers recognize the absurdity we recognize the absurdity. Are you sure we don't project the absurdity? Why do we recognize the absurdity? I think the great puzzle is in there. Why does now it look absurd and before it wasn't absurd? And why to religious people does it not look absurd, and to unreligious anti-theists it looks absurd? Well, isn't that a product of your formation? Or is there a secret sacred self that is guiding you? Or is there a God above that is guiding you? To what can you account the judgment? Well, that's persons judge. We're sort of going in circles here, aren't we? We're going round and round this tree. That's the metaphysical stage. It was only at a later period that by observing the reciprocal mechanical actions of bodies, hypotheses were formed which could be developed by mathematics and verified by experience. The math is better, says Galileo. Look at Vervaeke on Galileo. Well, now, unlike Aristotle's unmoved mover or the spheres that C.S. Lewis writes about in The Discarded Image, where God is the system. Now, Aristotle's God is very little God number 2 and almost all God number 1. The Christian God is always kind of going in and going out. It's always trying to have it both ways, the Christian God is. Aristotle's God is all God number 1. Well, we're giving up Aristotle's God, but what have we kind of done to Aristotle's God? We just sort of made it impersonal. Now it's laws. And once it's laws, talking to it doesn't help. I can go to my car that's breaking down and I can yell at it, or I can pray to it. And we say, well, talking to doesn't help. Why? Because what is talking? Well, talking is like moving air, and it's ideas. And so talking to my dog or talking to my car, talking to my dog kind of helps. Talking to my car doesn't help. And so now it's all impersonal. What do I need? I need a wrench. Well, now we're a ways into this. And so what Durant does is basically just takes the quotes out of this quote. But the other stuff that Murray put in is really quite helpful because he's connecting it to Kant. There is the positive stage. Positivism. The observation assuredly does not possess the far-reaching importance which Kant attached to it 100 years later or so, because now we just leaned into it religiously a little bit more. But whatever value it was, Turgot deserves the credit for having first stated it. And I never heard of him. But Murray continues. The notes which Turgot made for his plan permit us to conjecture that his universal history, capital U, capital H, would have been a greater and more profound work than the essays of Voltaire. Because, of course, Voltaire, here's the thing about Holland and Peterson and Murray. They're not going to forget what we learned in the 18th century. That, well, whether you see this as God's faithfulness or whether you see this as an impersonal nature only doing what it can't but do, don't listen to Rupert Sheldrake ask that inconvenient questions about constants that aren't terribly constant. But anyway, it would have been embodied in a digest form, the ideas of Montesquieu, to which Voltaire paid little attention, and the author would have elaborated the intimate connections and mutual interaction among all social phenomena, government and morals, religion, science, and art, something integrated. While his general thesis coincided with that of Voltaire, the gradual advance of humanity towards a state of enlightenment and reasonableness, there's the telos, but is it an instrumental telos? He made the idea of progress more vital. For him, it was an organizing conception, just as the idea of progress? They both start with P, they have a lot more in common besides the first letter they begin with. Is progress just providence in different clothes? Providence was for St. Augustine and Bossuet, I don't know who that is, an organizing conception, which gave history its unity and meaning, like stories of old. Oh, there is no unity and meaning in history. Okay, why should I care? Why should I care that there is? Why should I care that there isn't if there isn't? Because, as Jordan Peterson says, you're built to care. Before you could recognize trees, he says to Susan Blackmore. The view that man has thoroughly been blindly moving in the right direction is the counterpart to what Bossuet represents as a divine plan wrought out by the actions of men who are ignorant of it. You can very clearly see, or you should be able to, why God, at least a theoretical organizing principle that Jordan Peterson sees as that's kind of sort of a fundamental aspect to this whole project. And if you get rid of it, do you know what you're getting rid of? Chesterton was barking up the same tree. Got to read the sentence again. The view that man has been blindly moving in the right direction is the counterpart to what Bousset represents as a divine plan, wrought out by the actions of men who are ignorant of it. Joseph says to his brothers, "You meant it for evil, but God meant it for good," and is sharply opposed to the views of Voltaire and the other philosophes of the day who ascribed progress, capital P, exclusively to human reason consciously striving against ignorance and passion. Sam Harris is sort of a Voltaire without the belief in God, which Voltaire continued to maintain, and he doesn't write as well. Voltaire was the real deal. But then, of course, Jordan Peterson brings in the Bible, and Susan has a fit. Why? You've got to leave the Bible behind. Why? Why? Because we've got post-Christendom trauma. Okay. You don't have post-Buddhism trauma or post-Hinduism trauma. So the new thing on the other side of the ocean, well, that's all cool and everything, but you have a faith. And it's a faith in the Enlightenment. It's what it is. But that's your programming. But you sort of believe that you don't have a program, because in many ways, the first operating system we have take on, absorbed probably through our childhood and maybe embraced in your teens, you sort of hold it naively. And maybe you'll hold it naively, or maybe you'll be susceptible to others. You know, for a long time, well, Christians are only Christians because they're raised that way. Well, believers of the Enlightenment religion are only believers of the Enlightenment religion because they were raised that way. Right? No, that's not a faith. That's just seeing things directly. Oh, but that's what all the other religious people say. Why? Because it's your operating system. Well, where does that leave Tom Holland and Douglas Murray and Jordan Peterson? Again, a bunch of us are really, as a Christian, I'm praying for Jordan Peterson and I'm praying for his restoration. Because he's been through one heck of a ride. And I'd love to see him regain the faculties to reflect on that. Why? Because people are amazing. And sort of at the tribal level, church people are like, oh, they're coming to our side. I'm not so sure. Why? Because I don't think they're going to unlearn the 18th century. They're looking for the next thing, and the next thing is going to have to incorporate, and they might join an Orthodox church or a Catholic church or a Protestant church, or like Jordan Peterson, he's got enough money now, maybe he'll buy a church building in Toronto that, you know, churches are going to go belly up during COVID. There's going to probably be a lot of good ones on the marketplace, and maybe Jordan Peterson's going to continue his own church, his own religion, and try and piece things together. And even if any of them go to any of the existing religious service providers, it's going to be complex. Because we can't unlearn the 18th century. It's been with us for too long. And so at the end of this video, and again, I think I've got my sound dialed in. At the end of it, I want to do a full treatment of, well, I don't know. a full treatment of that interview with Tom Holland, because at the end of the story, he basically says, I'm living into the mythos. I don't care if Moses was real. Now, when he talks that way, he's understanding both audiences and a fair amount of the stuff. But he's kind of saying, hey, look, I'm a historian. And so when he writes In the Shadow of the Sword, and he basically says Islam, the story of Islam and its rise is not what Muslims think it is. He's being a modernist historian. That's what he's good at. But he's a modernist historian who's a novelist, and then when, as he says again and again, when asked to do this to his own faith, he did. And probably the Muslim thought he was a Christian, and he thought he was a son of the Enlightenment, and, well, he deconstructed. This is the deconstruction of Tom Holland. And Douglas Murray deconstructed, and Jordan Peterson deconstructed back in 1985. And more people are deconstructing, and not very many people are doing so as articulately as these three and understanding it. They're just sort of doing it as we see Christians deconstructing from the church, but they're reconstructing over in stuff that isn't well formed at all. And no theology has been done, and no philosophy has been done. And that's sort of where we're at. And so, and when I talked to Tom Holland, he kept saying, I'm not a theologian. I'm not a theologian. But what he noticed is that he needs to act as if the mythos is real, because he's discovering what Susan Blackmore conceded to is that his life is better with it. But he can't forget the 18th century. And so where does that go? And so, does Tom Holland start flirting with church? But when he goes to church, what's going on in his mind? He can't do it naively. What about the dinosaurs? Well, history, and C.S. Lewis did plenty of that. Many of us do that. But they're not just going to be someone who comes over from the old country and has been cradle Roman Catholics forever. He's a cradle Anglican, but what kind of new Anglican is he going to be? And it's especially interesting listening to talk about the pandemic, because he was impressed by the Pope and that dramatic liturgical scene and how that impressed upon him with his symbolic and imaginary. And on one hand, you almost hear Tom Holland begging for Bethel Church in Reading that, we're going to see Jesus do a miracle against COVID. And to see but Tom isn't, Tom isn't simplistic, and he knows history, and he knows that Christians died in pandemics. And he's hungering for something of what they had and what we seem to have lost. And that is sort of where everybody's at. Now, Douglas Murray is more cross-pressured because the gay thing, and you could say, well, Doug, there's lots of rainbow flag waving churches around, but he'll say, yeah, but they've sort of bought into this other thing. And so what do I do with my husband? And sort of fascinated by ancient churches, and there's so many people like that, and so many of you are like that. And Poe is right there, and many, many more too. And of course, all of us tribal pastors want to come in and say, well, I've got the answer. That's this really annoying habit by Christians. And so maybe because of these videos, it's refreshing to hear me say things like, I'm still working on my answer too. Oh, you're a Christian minister. I think all Christian ministers are. Now, like Jonathan Peugeot and Nathan Jacobs and many of you, I mean, on the Discord, how many go back to orthodoxy? Well, returning to a pre-psychologized practice. And that makes sense. It does. Because you can sort of put all these things to the side and say, I'll do the liturgy. I'll do the sacraments. I'll participate in the dramatic, liturgical, the vestments, and Glen Scrivener. Those aren't church clothes. You know, we Protestants don't have church clothes, do we? Because, you know, Protestantism, as Tom Holland points out, is deeply into it. But just like we can't forget the 18th century, we can't forget the 16th century. And maybe we'll say, well, the 16th century was a mistake. And maybe we'll say that the 10th century was a mistake, or the 11th century was a mistake, or the 4th century was a mistake. And so we'll try and go back and back and back, but that is what the Protestants tried to do. And so in all this restorationism, there's the same impetus that we have a sense that we've gotten astray, so we want to go back to a place that we're pretty sure they didn't go astray, but we can't forget the 16th or the 18th century. And so it's interesting to me that both Peugeot and Jacob are artists. And part of it, I think, is don't listen to the preachers shilling their tribe. And at least, you know, the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics are sort of, well, you have to sort of not worry about Bishop Barron, but the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics, well, they avoid, you know, Nathan Jacobs. He went to the same seminary I did in Calvin Seminary's PhD program, and it made him Orthodox. Hey, what's with that? What are my ministry shares going to? Livingstone doesn't have a lot of money for ministry shares. So the Orthodox avoid some of the Augustinian issues. Yeah, fair enough. But when you listen to Tom Holland and Jordan Peterson and Douglas Murray, they're pretty settled on the West, which Augustine is pretty deeply built into. And the West won in a way that the East didn't. And in sort of the Darwinian truth instinct, they're figuring that out. You know, maybe we've got a limited frame historical navigation problem. What do I mean by that? Where we always have to judge things from where we're standing. And so Jordan Peterson looks at the West and says, hey, the West got a lot of things right. Of course, a lot of people say, oh, the West got things wrong. Don't you think Foucault and all those philosophers were white people from the West? Marxism is just as much a part of the West as Adam Smith. It's all West. But we're navigating from in the middle of history. We don't stand on top of it. Again, modernism tries to stand on top and see it as such, and that ship has sailed. And so theirs is a decidedly Protestant journey. How malleable is faith? What to do with the gay question? Should practice be adapted to suit times and places? Can Jordan Peterson make up a religion? Well, a lot of those attempts have failed, and Jordan is wise enough, but Comte tried the same thing. Well, we're going to take the classics. And so in some ways, Jordan's been helpful in this. How can we participate in it? So, you know, it's fun looking at Jordan and Douglas and Tom sort of on the one side of the unbelievable table. But they're not going to become... Now we're back to the question, what is a Christian? How should I live? They're not simply going to become naive Christians. Now, I'm not saying they won't become Christians, but we can't forget the 16th or the 18th centuries. And so even if they would join the Orthodox Church, they're not in it like the third generation immigrant from Russia or Greece or some other place from the East. And they're not in it like the cradle Catholics are in it. And if they join the Christian Reformed Church, they're not in it like Paul Vander Clay, whose family came into it at the end of the 19th century without much philosophy or theology. And so where do we go? We're not sure. But we're talking and we're thinking. And that's a good thing. So at least I have something to post tomorrow.